Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about episode 1 of the final season of Insecure, Reunited Okay. And what can I say? This was a very nostalgic episode. I'm very sad it's ending, but all good things must come to an end. And so in terms of Molly and Issa, the question is, are they able to still grow with each other, grow together? Or have they outgrown one another, right? Is it time for them to part ways? And the episode starts off in a car ride with our 3 favorite people, and they have a conversation about Molly. And it seems like Molly has, she's kind of going through it after her breakup. She's posting Instagram pics of like half her face. She has inspirational quotes. And the thing is, there are 2 types of people, I think, after a breakup. The first, they just disappear and you never hear from them again. The other ones that kind of want to let you know that everything's okay by posting, very abstract pictures on Instagram. And so it seems like Molly is really going through it. She's not happy. And that's kind of the vibe you get in this episode. And so they're in this car and they're on their way to their university reunion, which is really appropriate, right? Because when you think about college, it's a place where dreams are supposed to come true, right? Like your future is still very much ahead of you. And so you kind of romanticize your life, right? Until you get out into the cold, cruel world and you realize things get harder. Life is long and it's just very difficult. And watching Molly and Issa, I didn't realize they weren't friends, right? It seems like after the finale, they haven't been on good terms, right? Although they're still connected, they're still very much apart. So they show up to this reunion, they're wearing the same sweater. And I thought it was really funny that Issa was like, yeah, I sleep in this sweater. And Molly was like, well, I don't. So again, they're there, but they're totally separate. So they're awkward, they're cordial, but you get the sense that they're not as close as they once were. So what we find out from this conversation is that Molly is still seeing her therapist. It seems that she's holding out some hope that she might get together, back together with her boyfriend, because she has a very small conversation with Kelly about this. So Molly is she's in that weird zone where she wants to move on, but she can't. Issa, at face value, I thought was doing very well. She was invited to speak at this panel, but it seems like she's also not doing that as well as she would have liked. And we find out that Kelly's dead. So this whole bit about Kelly was hilarious, as if they just wrote her away. You know what I mean? And that was the in memoriam, the picture. And it just goes to show, and it's really funny what people remember about you, looking back, especially in a college context, because all anyone could remember about Kelly was that she was very problematic. So they're walking through campus, and anyone who's gone back to college after some time, or high school after some time, or had these kind of reunions in places that you no longer frequent, it's like a museum of lost memories, right? So Issa's walking around, she's saying hi to people, you could tell she doesn't know who these people are. She's just kind of all these old mannerisms come back to her. And, looking back on something, I think there's 2 types of people who over romanticize the past, or people who kind of really that was such a horrible and difficult time. So I think both Molly and Issa romanticize their time in college. They kind of look back on it as a time where anything was possible. These were better days. It seemed like the future was so bright, and that's how they're kind of walking around, right? They're looking at all these places they used to hang out and kick it. And it's to the point that you could tell they romanticized it to the point where they're saying hi to people that they forgot were criminals. And I think it's true that familiarity breeds contempt at some point, because one of the funniest, this whole sequence, so they say hi to this one girl who, they say hi to her like they knew her, they were old friends. And it turns out she robs them in the end. And I thought this was such a good example of how people romanticize the past, to the point where they totally forgot who this woman was and why they probably don't speak to her anymore. So we learn more about Issa and Molly in this conversation, specifically through Issa's sort of mirror conversations. And so I'm going to miss these conversations. And listening to her talk to herself, I mean, it just kind of makes you think. So it seems like Issa used to want to be a lawyer, and that her and Molly were going to start a law firm together. And, something happened along the way, and she kind of didn't want to do that. So her old self is pretty much trying to figure out like how her future self turned out, right? So she's like, oh, you're CEO, and she's like, not really. So you, like, are we a millionaire? Like, she's just kind of looking at her, like asking her questions to the point where she even judges her fitness level, right? She's looking at her like, do we at least look good, girl? Like, do we at least look decent? And I think it's interesting because if you look back on who you were versus who you are now, like the expectations were very different. It's not that they were higher, they're just different. It's all very surface level, right? So as she's talking to her old self, a lot of the things are pretty, it's kind of what you think about when you're a kid, right? Like, do we have a house yet? Do we have money yet? Are we fit yet? Like things that we can see as sort of indicators of success, right? But as you get older and as you get into the real world, you realize that these things are not as important as emotional stability, community, family. Like there's other things that you need to ground you that kind of come before all those things. So watching her mirror self kind of shame her future self was just like really quite tragic. And it gets even worse as we get to this panel. So this panel is interesting. So they pretty much invited people that they saw who are considered successful or to kind of speak on different topics and different things. And the first thing I noticed is that Issa's sort of personality didn't hint this, like she didn't feel the same, right? Like her jokes weren't as funny. The crowd wasn't really feeling her, especially in comparison to the other two people sitting next to her. Like there was something missing. Like she was there, but she was not there. And at one point they kind of asked her, like, how do you know you were on the right path? How do you know what you're doing? And she was just like straight up, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know if I'm on the right path, but I'm living and I'm learning. The learning being capitalized, every letter there really being emphasized. And I think it's this answer that opened up the door so she could talk to Molly again. So this was a very honest answer, and I think it put their relationship at ease a bit, knowing that there was still an opportunity for them to grow together. So the panel ends, Kelly goes off, and I have to say, like, killing off Kelly metaphorically was just really interesting because there's how you think people will remember you and like how people will actually remember you, and they are just totally different things, right? And I think Kelly was hurt by the fact that the only thing people remembered about her was that she was funny and problematic. So Molly and Issa go off, they steal some drinks and they relax, and they're walking around campus, and their relationship before, I guess when they were in college, was quite carefree. Molly had friends with benefits, like they seemed relaxed, like there was a go with the flow energy that's no longer there between the two of them. And so they're kind of walking around remembering like all these sort of good times that they had, and it's really interesting because it's so awkward, right? Like they're trying to be normal, but it's not normal. And at one point I think Molly was like, are we gonna be okay? And Issa was like, I don't know, girl, like are you asking about us or the world? And this whole conversation about like whether or not you're on the right path was so perfectly like illustrated by this robbery. So they get in the car with Kelly and friends, and they decide, okay, we're gonna go somewhere to a party or something, and they bring this girl with them. And I knew there was something off about this girl, but I didn't know what it was until they robbed them. So that bit about the robbery just blew my mind because they were talking to her like they were old friends, like they were like, this girl could do no wrong. And not only did she rob them with such ease, right? Like they really didn't see it coming. And I think it just shows how extreme they've been romanticizing their past and like thinking about, everything associated with anybody at the college or associated with their college was seen as a good person, even though they were not. And so who knows, maybe their time in college wasn't as great as they thought it was. And I think that's what this woman was supposed to represent, because that was just out of this world. And so they're sitting there and they're laughing because that's all you could do. It was just so preposterous. And so the issue here is like, what are they supposed to do with themselves? And Issa says something interesting, which I think was very appropriate for this season and this episode, which is one way or another, you're gonna have to move forward, like by force. Like there's nowhere to go but forward, so there's no more looking back. We can look back all we want, but it's not gonna do anything. And so Issa was like, listen, you can move forward with me, but if you're gonna hold the past over me or you're gonna do it, like I can't really help you out, girl. And I think that robbery, like she kind of came to a realization of how silly this was. And she says something interesting, like, I don't want to worry about where I'm not or who I'm not and all these things. And I think it is true, especially when you compare the high expectations you have for yourself. Like, it is frustrating to think that you're not where you want to be or who you want to be, or the sad part, like you could still, like this might be it, right? Like Issa kind of rips herself apart. She's like, I'm still driving Lyft, I'm still like, you know, plumbing people's houses, like nothing has changed. But in terms of personal growth and development, obviously a lot has changed, but she doesn't feel it, right? Because she can't see it. And I think going to college kind of like makes those emotions worse, because all your dreams in college are very tangible and they're very like materialistic and what it looks like versus what it actually feels like. And I think that's what she was trying to communicate to Molly. And Molly was like, I don't have time. And I think why Molly is suffering is because this was the first time she was very open with someone. And so it was very painful for her, because now it's like, I got to do this again to find somebody. You know, like the way she talked about her breakup, like it was her last chance, you know, to find someone. And that's not necessarily true. And it's like, when she said I was running out of time, I was like, time for what? Like, what are you running out of time for, girl? And so I think Molly is someone that would do better by just slowing down. You know, like she has a timeline in her head. She had dreams in college. So I think for her, going back to campus was kind of a nightmare, because she's kind of looking at it as the glass half empty and not half full. And so this is part of the reason why the two of them might not be able to grow together, which is kind of their perspective on how they see things, right? And so the episode ends with, I guess Kelly has a podcast, which, I mean, I can't even think of someone more appropriate to narrate this. And this whole podcast, again, is about moving forward. And just when we thought we've seen it all, I guess Issa broke up with Lawrence. They were together, and then she kind of lets him go towards the end. And there is this kind of like energy towards the end, which I thought was appropriate. Like, it's so deflated. You know, everybody's deflated and they're tired. It's like a balloon that's popped, right? There's no drama. There's no screaming matches. Nobody cheated on anyone. It's just, you know, here you have a relationship that they've outgrown. You know, with Lawrence and Issa, they've outgrown each other. Whereas Molly and Issa, there's a chance they can kind of grow together. You know, there's like a room, there's a window there. There's something there, and they're both working on themselves. And so we'll see. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.